Hello and welcome to UK Column News. My name is Malcolm and today's date is Friday the 24th of October 2014. I'm joined in the studio today with Brian Garish. How do you do, Brian?
Hello.
And behind in the wheels of steel at the back is Nick. How do you do, Nick? Brian, quick update on the weather before we...
It's not too good. It's autumnal, it's misty, it's cloudy, it's drizzly in some parts of the country, apart from Accrington, where there's a little bit of sun peeping. Oh, Bedfordshire as well. So some parts of the country have got a little bit of sun peeping through. Not so here in Plymouth. It's pretty gloomy. We're going to add to that by going through the news.
Through the news, but do you want to say anything about your recent appearance on RT at all or anything like that?
Well, it was very kind of Russia Today to invite me on the programme to talk about the media activity around the accusation that a Russian submarine had gone into Swedish waters. I haven't seen the clip myself, but it was an opportunity, of course, to tell overseas viewers that more and more people in UK are becoming increasingly distressed with the standard of reporting, particularly in the BBC, clearly a British government propaganda machine. So I haven't seen that clip. If you haven't, you may like to go and see Russia Today to pick up what we talked about. That's about it, really.
Yep, good comment. So yeah, I think I'll start today, and I will move into the first story, which is about wastewater being recycled from our toilet waste, and that apparently 2 in 3 people back the plans to do this. This comes from Thames Valley, who have unveiled that they are considering using recycled sewage water to make up what they believe will be a shortfall in the supply of water to the Thames area. The plans would see waste from toilets, which currently makes its way into the River Thames, treated to make it safe to go into the main supply. Whilst common practice around the world, it may be worth remembering that most tap water around the world is considered undrinkable. Thames Valley believes that unless action is taken, there could be a water deficit of around 125 million litres per day by next year, due to the rise, or due to what they say is the rising population in London and the Thames Valley area. In regards to how Thames Valley came to the conclusion that 2 in 3 people would agree with their plans to use wastewater, a Thames Valley spokesman said, "We held an 8-week consultation and spoke to over 5,000 people at 22 roadshow events across our supply area, encouraging them to give us their views and discussing our plans. Over 2,700 customers visited our Have Your Say website, and nearly 400 of them used our interactive tool to see how the proposals could affect the bills." So really what I think, what we're talking about here is that they're really alluding to population growth. They're saying that, hey, there's too many people in the Thames Valley area. We're going to have to come to some crazy measures. We can't spend money on rebuilding infrastructure or improving the ways in which we store water or collect water. That's ridiculous. No, what we have to do is actually recycle the water we're already using. I actually also think that really what we're seeing here, we may see like a split off at some point between qualities of water. So if you want really clean water,
you pay more.
You pay more for it. So then the rich and the wealthy get to have clean water, while the rest of us have to drink water that has basically been recycled and had an umpteen amount of chemicals put in them.
You could argue that's happening already with bottled water, of course, where you can pay exorbitant prices, motorway service stations being top of the tree, I think, for water which is claimed to be organic, clean. From mountains. But of course, the other thing that's been going on with water infrastructure of UK is obviously following the neglect over many, many years, which has led us to this pitiful state. I think I'm correct in saying that reservoirs in the southeast of the country have been closed once our water infrastructure was privatised. So we close reservoirs, we then claim that there's not enough water, which is clearly rubbish in the UK, as the weather forecast today shows us. But what we're going to do is recycle sewage.
I think it's fascinating, actually, the privatisation of water, the whole element of it. You hear stories of people who keep buttresses in their garden, and then the water companies basically approach them and say, hey, what you're doing. I think it's terrible that a private company could own something that is actually supposed to be the elixir of life. Yeah, exactly.
Welcome to Water Supply UK.
Yeah. Wow.
So what have you got on MPs' expenses?
Well, MPs actually are declaring about second jobs and about how much money they earn as directors and having shareholdings in other corporations. And some MPs have basically, including backbenchers, have declared approximately £7.1 million in earning from second jobs and outside interests, according to parliamentary records. 26 MPs have declared earnings from directorships, paid employment and shareholders that exceed £100,000, as well as the money earned from their parliamentary salary. This news has sparked the debate as to whether an MP should have a second income or whether that income gives rise to a conflict of interest. For example, one of the biggest earners on the list is Charles Hendry, who, up until 2012, was a Minister of State at the Department of Energy and Climate. Hendry has received income of £100,000 from 3 companies in the energy sector: Four Wind, Atlantic Superconnection, and the energy and commodities group Vitol. So, again, we're seeing there's quite a substantial conflict of interest there if he's working for energy companies while at the same time working as the energy minister. However, the advisory committee on business appointments, which approves outside roles for former ministers, noted that Hendry, whilst in his ministerial role, had dealings with companies he now works for and their competitors. However, they believed that he did not draw upon privileged information he learned as a minister, as if you can just push that information out of your forehead.
This is what Fiona Woolf's child abuse inquiry is all about. I happen to mix with these people because I'm independent.
Yeah, of course.
The Home Office advises me on how to run my inquiry, but the Home Office lady that works with Fiona Woolf is independent now. Yeah. So the whole thing is a lie.
Because it's almost as if we're automated robots and we can just swip from one little box to another.
Trust us.
Yeah, trust us.
So I think there's a bit of a graph here about
if you can, Nick, if you want to bring this up there, this is basically a graph that was published in The Guardian. This is not our graph, and it's basically just showing the different MPs and how much they earn, the top 10 earners and where they're getting their money from. Geoffrey Cox, Stephen Phillips, and Edward Garnier each earn in excess of £200,000 for their work as barristers. But this is an interesting comment. Garnier defended his role and the role of other MPs by saying, "The two jobs stab is a bit lame and unoriginal," he said. "It is, in my view, essential that the Commons and thus the front bench teams in both government and opposition are not just reserved for professional politicians without experience of the world outside. Westminster Parliament is the better for having MPs who do not spend and have not spent their whole time inside politics." And I totally agree with that comment on the basis of its own. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about people who have these jobs and have these conflicts of interest whilst they are advising government or working within government. And there's a completely different spin there. Conservative Nadine Dorries, who earns an extra £167,000 primarily from writing novels, said, "I find it really interesting that no one ever queried the time I gave to being a mother and an MP at the same time. I am, however, absolutely delighted at my writing, which is in effect my weekend hobby." And again, I mean, okay, I understand the argument that motherhood and parenthood is in a sense maybe not an occupation, but it is something that spends your time and it takes your time away from. But to suggest that you'd have a conflict of interest because you're a parent and being an MP, compared to, say, having a conflict of interest while working for 3 energy companies and being the energy minister, I think is slightly different. And I think the comments who I've read out, I think they're kind of missing the point. Or maybe they aren't missing the point. Maybe they're just covering themselves. I don't know.
Well, I've just wondered, Nick, if you bring that slide back on screen, I just happened to notice there that Mr. Gordon Brown, so it says, is earning £492,000 a year from public speaking. And I'm beginning to suspect these statistics because would anybody actually pay to hear Gordon Brown speak? I don't know.
Do you know what's interesting that you bring that up, actually? Because it says at the bottom, the disclaimer was that he's not directly benefiting from that. That's going to his office. But hang on a minute. Aren't you kind of using the funds that's going to your office, which enables you to do the public speaking in the first place?
No, he's political, but he's independent.
Oh, of course, yeah, he's independent.
So, whilst they're paying more money to themselves, they have a problem paying money for the NHS.
Yes, big problems here, because there's a new report that's come out today from the NHS England, and it's basically part of that report was considering the costs, the 8 billion, or the extra sort of black hole that needed to fund the NHS, which they come to the rounded figure of 8 billion. Each of the 3 parties has welcomed the principles within the report, which is basically more change and more reform, but refused to say that they will put forward the £8 billion. Norman Lamb, the Liberal Democrat health minister, said there needs to be a fundamental review of funding for the NHS. So again, part of the reform is going to be about changing the way the NHS is funded and presumably where that funding is going and to
well,
whom
that's
it's
to
going.
collapse the NHS
Indeed.
to get in the private sector.
Yeah. That'll be where predominantly the money will be going, absolutely. Andy Burnham, Shadow Health Secretary, parroted figures by Monitor, who has suggested that full integration of health and social care could save £4.4 to £6 billion. But again, they're talking again about cutting services to basically manage this supposed black hole, as opposed to actually trying to fill the black hole so that we can actually give the supply, to the demand that is required. If you understand what I'm saying, they're just going to be cutting services to fill up this £8 billion black hole, where really they should be fixing it as in essence. George Freeman, the Minister for Life Sciences, said, "What this report invites us to do is to think more profoundly about how we evolve and change the healthcare. The central way to fund the NHS is to have a strong economy." And Bruce Keogh, the NHS England Medical Director, has said that unless the savings are made and unless the NHS gets the appropriate support, both financially and politically, there is a risk that services will have to change, maybe cut, or that there will be shortages of staff and there will be issues with waiting times, and there is a risk that we will have to restrict treatments. So I think, exactly as you alluded, Brian, this is part and parcel of dismantling the NHS so we can bring in a new raft of private organisations.
Transformation agenda, change, more
more reform.
Of course, if you still haven't seen it, do have a look at the UK Columns exclusive report into common purpose and NLP within the NHS towards 1 million change agents, and you can see that via the UK Column website. Well, we are under scrutiny by the government. It's clear that the state is getting more and more fearful of anybody who dares speak out to expose what they're doing, what they're saying, and how much they're paying themselves. And Reaper is being used by a number of people. And luckily, a few people in the mainstream media are waking up to the fact that this supposedly it's terrorist-linked terrorist-linked legislation which is being used to actually spy on people. So Reaper, Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, is now being used by local councils, for example. And Big Brother Watch are saying here that some councils are authorising 11 covert surveillance operations a day. So we know how corrupt the local authorities are, and yet local authorities are now carrying out more and more spying on ordinary people to see whether they've paid council tax or they're taking allowances they shouldn't have. Corrupt councils, highly politicised councils, and they're using this sort of legislation to spy on people. Well, the squealing has reached Guardian level, because they've got a pretty big article here. It's talking about the Sun, but I think it's significant the Guardian's run it. Sun makes official complaint over police use of Reaper against journalists. And this is where the police, without they did have proper authority, because under Reaper they just needed to speak to their senior officer, but he allowed them to hack into a journalist's phone in order to recover data supposedly connected to the Plebgate saga. So this was Newton Dunn's phone. And here they're saying this is an assault on free press, which of course it is. We've got corruption, criminality within Britain's police forces. We've had the City of London Police, £1 million operation against plumber Ian Puddick. And now they're using Reaper to spy on us. Well, it's not only local authorities, because the BBC is also using this to try and hunt down licence fee dodgers. This article in the Mail amused me, because we've got a set-up TV licensing van that is apparently able to go around and work out whether you're watching TV and what programme you're watching. I don't believe a word of it. But do I believe the BBC had used Reaper? Certainly. It's surprising the BBC can't use Reaper to track down the paedophiles in its own organisation, isn't it?
It's remarkable, isn't it? It's remarkable.
Yeah, but there we are. We need to stop it, withdraw your consent, start shouting about it. Otherwise, the state is closing in quite quickly. And it's no good being a couch potato on this particular issue.
Indeed. I'm going back to the NHS report. Another aspect of it was talking about health and people's health in England. And so Public Health England, PHE, says lack of exercise is as dangerous as smoking and directly contributes to 1 in 6 deaths. The warning concludes that the UK population is now 20% less active than those living in the UK during the 1960s, and officials claim that without major changes to the way we live our lives, the entire welfare state in Britain could collapse under the strain of self-inflicted diseases. So I think it's really interesting that we focus on the language that they're talking about. We're back to change, we're back to reform, and they're talking about change the way we live our lives. I think that's a really, I've lifted that from the article, and that's the kind of language we're talking about, changing our lives. And it made me think of the London Health Report, which I wrote about last week on the Nudge, and just how they're talking about starting with the people, not with the NHS. Let's change the people, not the NHS.
Well, this is the government's so-called nudge agenda.
Absolutely.
This is changing the behaviour of people, and they won't even know it.
Yep.
Heart of the Cabinet Office programme, we are to be changed to fit their society. Yep. They're not going to create a society to support ordinary people. It's very dangerous.
It is very dangerous. It is very dangerous. And what they're doing with this sort of article and this report, they're really focusing on people's habits, and they're suggesting basically that the habits that are endangering people's health, like smoking, drinking, and eating, are basically going to ruin the NHS. In fact, the quote was, "They will ruin the welfare state." So, there's a lot of...
it's not the government that's ruining the welfare.
It's not the government, people who are managing it, indeed.
Because you shouldn't have sick people going to hospital. It's their own fault because they're fat, they eat potatoes, they drink too much, they smoke. It's your fault.
It's our fault.
And when the NHS collapses, it's your fault, it's not the government's fault. Brilliant,
Absolutely.
Isn't it?
It is brilliant, because when you think about it, when we're talking about smokers and people who eat too much or drink too much, we're talking about a very small minority of the public. I actually think the majority of people are actually quite sensible, quite healthy, do exercise, do eat properly. The media focuses so much on these small minorities and make us think that everybody's like that, when in fact it's not. So to suggest that several 100,000 people could actually crash the welfare state over, like you're saying, mismanagement of government is absolutely crazy in my mind. The report follows a 5-year plan for the NHS that was published today, which warns that the health service desperately needs reform and cannot survive unless these changes are made to both the health service and ultimately the people that use it. The report by Simon Stevens, NHS Chief Executive, warned, quote, "The future health of millions of children, the sustainability of the NHS and the economic prosperity of Britain all now depend on a radical upgrade in prevention and public health." So again, we're hearing words like radical, upgrade, reform, change.
Transformation.
And it's ultimately pointed at us. So I think actually, what's coming out of this report is actually quite dangerous and is actually quite sickening. And as we've said already, the message is we, the people, have to.
Yeah, and if you don't change, you're going to end up in prison, which brings us back onto the track of French company Sodexo making profit out of British prisoners through, amongst others, HM Prison Peterborough. So thank you very much to our viewer who sent us in this article. Now, this is going back to 21st of January 2014, but it says an inquiry into allegations that a woman who suffered a miscarriage in a prison was forced to clean up after herself has found no disciplinary action was needed. The woman lost her baby at Peterborough Prison, run by private firm Sodexo. So worth reading this BBC article to find out, of course, that Sodexo did nothing wrong. It was only a nasty allegation. There wasn't any miscarriage or anything nasty to be cleaned up. So there is some detail in the article. Sodexo were contacted and they said, I can confirm that the Sodexo investigation found that no disciplinary action was necessary in connection with the incident. So a very, very serious incident seems to me. Who investigates it? Well, it's Sodexo, who happens to run the prison themselves. And we've got the National Offender Management Service in there as well. Having considered the findings and the facts, NOMS agrees that this position is correct and that the care, advice and treatment given to the person concerned were equivalent to what would have been prescribed to someone in the community who had presented with the same symptoms. Presented with the same symptoms, we're talking about an abortion here, but not to worry because nobody's at fault. So let's remind ourselves, this is the state of Melanie Shaw after 3 months of no treatment for a leg ulcer in Sodexo prison. And of course, what Melanie and other people in the prison have been telling us, that while she was in for 3 months, there were suicides, there were prisoners breaking legs through jumping off second floor platforms. And we understand that a lady aborted twins as a result of being given a contraceptive injection whilst she was pregnant. But I'm sure, Malcolm, that Sodexo will do a satisfactory investigation and find that it didn't do anything wrong in the first place.
I'm sure.
Do you think?
What, you mean it will carry out its own investigation of itself to make sure that it itself didn't cause any wrong?
I would say so. And probably if Sodexo carries out a sufficiently thorough investigation of itself, finding that it didn't do anything wrong, I think probably David Cameron's government and MP Andrew Sellis would suggest that their profit margin should be increased. Yeah. They should take more money out of it.
It's actually quite terrifying, isn't it, when you think private organisations taking it to this level? Because, you know, I mean, Melanie's leg is terrible. The fact that the woman would suffer a miscarriage in jail is absolutely horrendous. And as we're discussing, you know, that these people are able to carry out their own report, their own investigation. I mean, this is the private world where there is no accountability. There is no one above a private organisation in that position that can actually enforce anything upon.
You take it through. You're arrested by your by evidence gathered by your local council under REPA. You go to a police station where you're handled not by the police but by Serco, G4S. You go through a court system where you're handled by a private company. And then you're sentenced to 5 years in a private prison, where the Melanie Shaw case is showing that prison is simply accountable to themselves. Yeah. Well, and of course the overseas shareholders.
I suppose if we go to America and we see where this is much further ahead than where we are, I mean,
you disappear in the gulag.
You disappear in the gulag, and it's profitable. So it's encouraging the fact that you make more crimes, you make more like penalties, so that you can send more people to jail, so you can make more money for your private friends.
This is absolutely true.
It's terrifying.
And I'll just add to that, it was an interesting little experience talking to Russia today. That, of course, back in the Cold War era, we would have been here in UK and Western Europe, looking the other side of the Iron Curtain, saying, well, of course, all of these gulags, the abuse in prison, people being beaten up, people denied medical treatment, that will be all happening under the Stasi regime in East Germany, or the remnants of Stalinist regime in communist Russia. What we've now got is exactly the same thing being built in this country. Let's have a look at a few faces, because individuals always help us focus. So meet some of the men responsible for Sodexo Prison Peterborough. Nick Leader, unfortunate name, this is the prison governor. And of course he was originally working in the public prison service, left with a few blots on his copybook, but he's moved across to head up Peterborough Prison. On the Sodexo team, we've got Mike Conway here, Director of UK Operations at Sodexo Justice Services. So just think of those words. Sodexo is providing the justice services. But we say not to worry, because, of course, these men are under the tight control of Andrew Sellis MP, Minister for Prisons. So let's have a look at Andrew. And here he is. This is the man. He's carrying out important duties with the Wear It Pink Day. So we just look, it's a wonder he's not in his underpants or, doing a Brooks Newmark. At least he's got clothes on. But he thinks it's more important to dress up like some, I don't know, pop star than it is to deal with matters in the prison. So we've tweeted out this. So here's Melanie in the before and after shot. And I'm going to say, although many people wanted to see video of Melanie leaving the prison and more photographs of her, Melanie has been through an exceptionally tough time, and she needed time to recover. But has abuse gone on in the prison? Yes. Has Melanie and indeed other prisoners, have they been denied medical treatment? Yes, they have. If we're going to stop this, it's going to take a lot of people to really hammer the system. But we are constantly told not to worry because the state is working to pick up paedophiles. And thank you to the Welsh contingent who sent in Wales Online here. And it says that internet chat room paedophiles coaxed a 9-year-old girl into undressing in front of a webcam, but not to worry because an NSPCC campaign is going to close the loophole in the law. Well, we're getting a bit cynical about NSPCC because they told us very clearly that they were not going to act at all to help Melanie Shaw, childhood abuse victim, nor did they see a conflict of interest in working with local councils who are hiding at best, but we believe destroying child abuse records. So we have this insidious mix of charities who are being given government roles unaccountable to nobody. Some of the MPs are picking up on things. We just wanted to say credit where it's due to John Mann. He was asking questions in the House on the 20th of October. Offences against children. This is attributed to John Mann to ask the Secretary of State for the Home Department whether any files were taken from the journalist Don Hale, editor of the Bury Messenger in the 1980s, who authorised the seizure of such files, and whether the material seized included minutes of investigations within the Home Office concerning child abuse and honourable members. So that was a pretty straight question. Let's look at the reply here. On the 7th of July, the Home Secretary announced to the House that she had appointed Peter Wanless to lead a review of an investigation by an independent expert into what information the Home Office had received in relation to child abuse allegations during the period 79-99. I think I'm right in saying Mr. Wanless is actually NSPCC. Somebody will correct me if I'm wrong. The Permanent Secretary appointed Richard Whittam QC to assist. The review has had access to all material identified which would relate to child abuse and which the department still holds. The Home Secretary has now received the report. This is a smokescreen, an absolute smokescreen by the government, and it's quite clear that the government is doing everything in its power to make sure that the whole thing of child abuse concerning politicians and senior establishment figures becomes as blurred as possible. And the other thing we'd like to remind on this subject, hammering it home, is we'd pointed out the criticism against Fiona Wolf heading up the child abuse inquiry. This BBC article said that a legal challenge had been launched against her appointment, and this of course was a judicial review. So this brings us straight back to the fact that the government is so worried about the power of judicial reviews that, as politics.co pointed out, the coalition is working to dismantle so that we haven't got the means of challenging this kind of cover-up.
That's actually I think quite important, because if you think about the nature of a judicial review, is you can put that forward to the judiciary, someone who's qualified to make that sort of decision, and so that could be of anyone. That could be if you're in a prison and you really disagree with what the prison ward is doing, you think it's unconstitutional, it's breaking the law or some sort of legal agreement, then you can put that forward to a judicial review, and you can have a judge make a judgment on that. If you take that away, well, then all of a sudden the corporation gets the final say, does it not? Because who's going to review it?
Well, that's the corporation. You mean the City of London?
The City of London, yeah. Sorry, yeah.
Or the private sector, because they've got the money to drive it through.
Indeed.
The courts.
Just very quickly, I had to return a camera the other day, which was 4 days over board. Had it for 4 days, and the woman behind the desk told me I couldn't return it because it wasn't part of Argos's policy, right? So I had to try and explain to her about statutory rights and that I had the right to return this within 14 days. And she was adamant, because she'd been on in-house courses that told her that Argos policy is top dog and what Argos says goes. Obviously, I got the manager involved and I got my money back. It's all fine. But I think that's interesting and tying in with judicial reviews, is because we're seeing more and more this privatisation, more and more private companies getting more power, more say. And I think taking the judicial review certainly helps that.
Yeah. Well, you don't want to kick up too much of a stink, because the Telegraph warning us here that the government adamant to clamp down on people. So now we've got changes to the Computer Misuse Act. So anybody who's deemed to be hacking and they're causing major problems with telephone networks or energy supplies or government computer systems, so they could be sentenced to life in prison. But isn't it interesting that in this Telegraph article we're talking about computer hacking, but the image that they put with the computer hacking is of rioting in the street. So the implication is that if you're a hacker, you couldn't be hacking in order to get the truth out there. You are actually involved in rioting on the streets.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, have a look at this one because a lot of people talking about this. Most incredible video by FCK Hate. And they've been dressing up little girls to look adult and encouraging them to say the most amazing things. I'd encourage everybody to watch this video called Potty Mouth Princesses Drop F-Bombs for Feminism. So these little girls being used in order to promote feminism and to apparently warn against discrimination. How's it been done? You dress these young girls up as adults and you get them to repeat the most foul language. Quite a lot of information comes up if you simply Google that, FCK Hate, and quite a lot of people talking about the YouTube clips and complaining about it. But this is what interested us, is that it's being sold like this. Best viral video I've seen in a long time. I love it, love it, love it, love it. Exploitation for a good cause. I'm in. So we just thought we'd highlight that because, of course, the missing word here is child. We have got child exploitation on screen. Most disgusting language by little girls dressed up in a pretty explicit way for this message promoting feminism.
Yeah.
I believe before you came in, you actually made a phone call about this.
I did, yes.
By a strange coincidence.
I did. I just happened, in a private capacity, I phoned NSPCC because I was just as appalled by this video as I think most people here everyone here in the office. Yeah. So I wanted to know what the NSPCC were doing about this, and so I called them up. And they did say that they'd received quite a number of complaints, although they couldn't tell me how many. The woman who dealt with me said that she dealt with quite a few, probably 5 to 10 complaints herself, and that management were convening to discuss what they could do about it. But that was all that I had from it. There wasn't the same level of urgency that I feel like that there should have been, and I don't think there was the same level of disgust, because I think for a lot of people, because we're so drowned out by the way the type of media culture we have now, this sort of behaviour is almost kind of acceptable. But as you've already mentioned, it's exploitation, and what I find really interesting is it's apparently about liberating women and feminism, and yet to me it degrades women. It makes women seem, if she was a woman, let's presume that she's a little girl, but let's presume she was the woman that's being portrayed in the princess suit. She's foul-mouthed, she's aggressive, she's all these things that are unfeminine to me. Yeah. For me, real power and femininity is that, the gentleness of women, that kind of that sturdy, quiet, gentle sort of, ladiness that we're losing now in our society that has become feminism. I think it's remarkable to me.
Well, we decided we'd have a little look into the company. You can do this yourself. Just Google FCK Hate, and we come up with an American company here at P.O. Box 88101 Columbus, Ohio. But if you dig in a little bit deeper, you actually find that they've been taken over by Synergy Media. And it says limited, which indicates it's got a British connection. I didn't get time before the programme to get into this deeper, but there is something going on. Look at the people. They're sold as cartoon-like figures, and we're led to believe that these 4 individuals have come out of nowhere, set up this, what is clearly a very powerful media team. Here's some of the clients that they're boasting about. Of course, we can see the link in with fckhatehere.com, and they're peddling something which I think is pretty unpleasant. this is more than supporting feminism. I think this is really playing around with people's minds. Could anybody help us find out where their funding really comes from? Are they backed by the big guys, George Soros Open Society, that sort of thing? But we'll leave it to you. And we just wanted to say here, it's amazing that NSPCC says childhood is worth fighting for, except child abuse, where it's related to Melanie Shaw. Of course, NSPCC didn't want to get involved with Melanie. So we're just going to bring in reality versus the claims of this charity. Well, health, we want to say here that anybody who's coming to the conference, British Constitution Group conference, or the health conference on Sunday, if you do want to pay at the door, you need to call this number first, 07967 111 032. So you cannot just turn up at the door, because we have to regulate numbers. Did I use that horrible word? I did, sorry about that. But we have to know who's going to be there to look at capacity at the hall. So if you do want to pay on the door, you have to phone that telephone number first.
Yep.
A little bit caught me out there, because that one happens to be out of sequence. We're going to come back onto that in a minute. I'll just scroll through onto here. So here's the advert for the conference, of course, for the Saturday British Constitution Group. Sunday, we've got the health part of it. And I'm also to put up this notice, which is that when you book your tickets, if you're after a room at the conference as well, when you book your tickets, in the confirmation email you're sent, there are details of a phone number to call and a password to get access to the room allocation. At the moment, if you're an ordinary member of the public and you try and book a room at the hotel, you'll be told it's full. So there are rooms still available if you want to attend over the whole weekend, but take notice of what's being said here about the phone number and the password. And I'm just going to bring things to a close really by saying the new UK column is out. Subscribers will have already received it, or most of you have. It's focused on the Constitution and common law, ready for our conference. This is the front page. We believe now we're simply watching treason by the Lib Lab Con. It's spoken very softly. It's being drifted in. But we are watching these people commit treason as they attack our Constitution. So, as labelled below, shall we consent to their new Bill of Rights, or let our Constitution and common law guard our freedoms? And I've got to say, a brilliant front page designed by young Malcolm, who is sitting next to me.
Thanks, Brian.
So if you're particularly impressed by that, the graphics of the front page, and of course the Illuminati butterflies coming forth from Theresa May's mouth, the monarch butterfly. That's all Malcolm's work.
I'm looking for business, so anyone want to employ me? I mean, I'm joking.
Thank you.
I'm joking. I've also got to mention Doomwatch today as well.
Of course.
Doomwatch is on tonight between 6 and 8, so that would be great if everyone could watch that. And also I've been asked to read out a little something from Alex. He's basically inviting us to join him for the 46th variant of the radio show Doomwatch. The usual mix of news stories, comment and audience interaction with special guest Clive de Carle, host of the Health Revolution on the UK Column Live, and Dr. George Giorgio, director of the Da Vinci Holistic Health Centre in Larnaca, Cyprus, which specialises in many aspects of holistic medicine. Clive and George will both be at the Your Constitution, Your Health conferences over the weekend of the 1st and 2nd November 2014 at the Ramada Birmingham Sutton Coldfield Hotel. Your Health, 7 Keys to Survival in Post-Antibiotic World. The Sunday part of the conference has had its international guest list assembled by previous Doomwatch guest, Dr. Graham Downing.
Okay, brilliant.
Yeah. I also, actually, before we wanted to go, I noticed a little comment in the chat room. Do you mind if I comment on it?
Of
if that's
course.
okay?
Please go ahead.
It was. I'm not going to say who it was by, but it was actually echoed by quite a few people. So I just wanted to say the comment was: every day I see the news here, I sense more outrage in me. right? And I just wanted to say that that's great. So now let's do something about it. Let's do something active. Let's do something practical. Don't sit there and get angry and all bubbly, because that's what we do in the office. And it's not a good thing, right? So active. Channel it into something more active, and that's great. I just wanted to say that. So
yeah, it's action conquers fear is the little statement, and it's absolutely true. Yeah. So if you're getting angry, that's a good thing, but that anger's got to be channeled into a productive and peaceful way. Yeah. Okay, thanks for joining us. We'll be back 1 o'clock on Monday. Bye-bye. Bye.